welcome back to the Rack Show, the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show, where we talk about everything the responsibly armed citizen should know. Today we have a fun topic. We are talking about the best handgun for concealed carry. So this is going to be a little bit of a spicy one. A lot of opinions here. In studio with me, I have Mr. Kelly, Tim Kelly of Apache Solutions. Tim, how are you?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
I am fantastic. So, best handgun for concealed carry. Let's open this can of worms.
Oh man, this is going to be a long one. This is definitely going to be a long one. I don't know. I'd say one of the more common things, the common thoughts that you hear from people is it's the one that you have on you, right? The best gun for concealed carry is the one that you have on you. I don't necessarily know that I subscribe to that type of mentality.
No.
Because there's all types of different guns out there.
Yep.
And not all of them are really
ideal. Right.
Yeah, man. I mean, there are some, and it's funny because people will kind of make stuff up in their minds of, this makes sense. This teeny tiny little gun I can just stick in my pocket,
Yep.
and it makes sense. I'll have it on me. Should I need a gun, it's there. But it's also inadequate. Like it's not, it doesn't have a sufficient size, like as far as caliber goes. It doesn't have sufficient capacity. You can't quickly access it. There's all types of things that can go wrong with this idea of the best concealed carry gun is the one that you have on you.
Right.
I'd say if we're going to add anything to that, because I do agree,
Have a gun on you.
You need to have
right?
a gun on you, right? But I would add maybe you should train with it and have evaluated its performance to some reasonable metric.
Right.
Right. I mean, can you pass? I don't know, the FBI qual with it. Right? Can you do that?
Well, it's something else to consider. When we start talking about different handguns and things like that, and concealed carry in general is a compromise, right? You're compromising something, right? You're compromising maybe a little bit of comfort. You're compromising a little bit of maybe in some cases mobility. So you have to weigh what works best for you and what most likely, right, is going to happen. If anything, we're not promised another day.
Right.
And so having that mindset and, as we talk about in other shows, having a clear idea of what our mission is, what tools am I going to have, available to me that's going to help me complete that mission. Now, I think, as you know, I am an absolute sucker for interesting firearms.
Yeah.
I end up picking up all kinds of interesting things and this is cool. I wouldn't carry everything I've ever purchased.
Right.
There's definitely range toys and, some things that I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Let me go play with this a little bit and figure out why other people buy them. And okay, now I know why other people buy them because they're cheap, but I will not trust this gun to cycle when I needed to or to work when I needed to. But you're right? Think of like those like the Derringers and things like that, right?
Man, I've got like a special place in my heart for those guns. For some reason, I am so intrigued by them.
Right.
I've wanted to buy, excuse me, I wanted to buy one of those Bond Arms Derringers. One is chambered in like 45 long Colt and 410 or something just because.
Right. Because America.
Yes, exactly. No, I mean, if I were to get one, I'd say like 9mm or 38 or something like that would probably be best. But I've always wanted one of those.
They're fun to shoot, right? And I mean, and that's the thing. They're fun to shoot. They're really neat to look at. It's definitely something like when you're in a safe environment, when you can show off, some of the stuff. It's like, oh, check this out. This is pretty neat. But that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's cool. It may be fun to shoot. But what's the practicality, of actually using that and implementing that in a concealed carry regimen? The phrase that I hear more often is "get off me gun." Right?
Oh yeah.
I hear it all the time. Yeah, this is my get off me gun, and it ends up being a little 22 or a little 17 HMR, a little Derringer. Those folding pistols, the credit card folding pistols. They got real popular a few years back. That folding pistol was the one gun that I purchased and immediately regretted my decision. Got rid of it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't get rid of stuff, but that particular folding, I don't even remember the manufacturer now, but that little folding credit card size 22, it just is unsafe.
Yeah.
Right. Open, open trigger guard. I mean, there's a lot of things about it. It's,
Right.
you got to fumble with it in order to cock it. I mean, it's not ideal.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that are out there that are like that.
Well, I mean, when people talk about a get off me gun, right, they're talking about if somebody makes physical contact with you
Right.
and is on top of you, pummeling you, you think you're going to access your firearm through your pocket while somebody is on top of you hurting you or pinned you up against a wall hurting you or
Right.
is, ripping you through the side of your car, some type of violent act. You think you're going to have time to access it. Even if you think you're going to have time to access it, these Derringers and these smaller guns, they all require that you cock the hammer before you press the trigger.
Right.
They're not double action; they're single action only. So you would have to not only access the gun, but get it pointed in the general direction of your adversary, cock the hammer, and then pull the trigger. There's a lot of stuff that can happen
All
in that
while
time.
being pummeled.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that can happen in that time, like them getting access to your gun,
Right.
and then maybe you get the hammer cocked and it's no longer pointed at them, it's pointed at you. Because when you're talking about fighting in close proximity, if you bring a gun into that fight, you no longer have a gun.
Right.
We have a gun.
Right.
That both parties have access to that gun because they can reach it, they can get their hands on it. So the whole the mindset of the get off me gun just doesn't make any sense. So what's the best handgun for concealed carry?
It depends, right? It's complicated, right? I think it is an individual's choice, and it relies heavily on, again, what your comfort level, your body size, your
Right.
build, male, female. There's other things to consider there, right? So male, we don't, females tend to have wider hips, males not so much. All of that plays a factor in as far as how to carry, where to carry, clothing choices. I think we're a little bit later. We may talk about, ammunition choices and ballistics capacity.
Right.
There's a lot of different things that are out there. For me, I've been called a Glock fanboy. I'm by no means a Glock fanboy, but I do happen to carry a Glock firearm.
Yeah.
And that's because it works for me,
Yeah.
right? I've have thousands of training rounds through that firearm. Like, I know how it's going to react. I know how to use it, and I'm comfortable with the way that I carry it. I'm comfortable with the gear and the holster and the placement of that, and so that's what my choice.
Yeah. And I too primarily carry a Glock. I also have been known to carry a SIG from time to time.
Yeah.
I will say the opposite of this, the best gun to carry is the one that you have on you. That mentality, the polar opposite end of that spectrum would be the fanboys, the Ford versus Chevy type folk.
Right.
You got to carry a Glock, or you got to carry a 1911. 1911 is the only way to go, something like that. And it's just that's not realistic either. You're absolutely right. It's really dependent on the person that's carrying it, their environment that they're in the most, and their reasoning.
Yeah.
So.
No, 100%. I mean, and there's varying different reasons for why you would want to carry one firearm over another. Size, fitment. I mean, there's a lot of different things. I mean, revolver versus semi-auto. I think that's a fantastic topic. I definitely think that's something we should talk about. Let's talk about that. Let's get on that after the break. We'll be right back, and we'll continue the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show.
Welcome back. Welcome back. My name is Tim Kelly, and I'm with Frank Horvath. We are talking on the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show. And the topic today, we're talking about the best handgun for concealed carry. We've talked about just some different ideas, different thoughts and theories out there that exist. Right now, we're discussing revolver versus semi-auto. So, yeah, which type of handgun would you prefer to carry, Frank?
So my absolute preference is semi-auto.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, it's something that we hear real regularly from students. Students that haven't trained with us, right?
Sure.
Those initial touch points. The differences between the two, because for some people, a revolver may be absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
But let's knock some common tropes out of the bat, like right now. Let's take care of something. Is a revolver more reliable than a semi-automatic handgun?
Absolutely not.
No. Why?
No, the revolvers are a lot more finicky, and there is a common misconception that revolvers are just easier. No matter what, when I pull the trigger, it's going to go bang. Unlike a semi-auto, there's just that confusion there. That's not always true. There's all kinds of like intricate components inside that revolver that can cause some issues, and it will.
And I compare it to like a clock, right? So there's all these mechanisms, there's all these different springs, there's all this timing that has to work just absolutely perfect in order for that revolver to go bang.
Right.
Now, more often than not, that it will, but with improper maintenance, with just purchasing a revolver, throwing some ammo in it, and just slamming it in a purse or something like that, the likelihood that gun is going to be functional, usable when you need it to use, it's not going to be 100%. We got some other issues that we'll talk about another time, but the common misconception or misperception, excuse me, that a revolver is more reliable than semi-automatic. It's not true.
Right.
There's a lot to it. Now, there are absolutely time and place for a revolver.
Sure.
I often carry a revolver. It depends. Revolvers are, especially smaller revolvers, like the
Little
5-shot, little snubbies. If you're in formal attire, right? If you're at maybe even church or something like that. If you're in an environment that it may be difficult to conceal a regular firearm or full-size firearm, they're absolutely good options.
Right.
Again, time and place, it depends. But regardless, train with it. Figure out, make sure that you can control it. That's the other thing. Again, often we hear about, a husband will go out, and I think we've said on the show before, a husband will go out and buy a little Airweight 357 or whatever for, revolver for their spouse. And, because, cocking, a 5-pound slide is more challenging than pressing a, 17-pound trigger. But, again, that's a common misperception, something that we see often.
Yeah,
and
one of the things that I hear the most is, well, I got her that handgun because it's easy to shoot. How have you determined that a revolver is easier to shoot? Shooting a double action revolver is 100 times more difficult than shooting a semi-automatic handgun. It is not easy to shoot.
Right.
I've never been a revolver guy. I love them. It's kind of like the Derringer thing. I've got this like mad attraction to them, and I want them all. But I have a hard time, even though I try really hard, have a hard time finding an occasion for me to carry a revolver over a semi-auto. I do personally.
Yeah.
Now I still have barbecues and stuff like that around the house. It's nice to have that,
option.
Have that option or something. Or as you said a while ago, having like a backup snubby or something like that on the ankle. It's great. But if you actually train, one of the things that you'll learn really quick is just how difficult pressing the trigger on a double action revolver is as compared to that of a center fire, striker fired
right.
semi-automatic, a Glock or a SIG or something like that. It's much more difficult. Much more difficult.
Right. No, I completely agree. Completely agree. And okay. So the revolvers is semi-auto. Then they're I think we've pretty much squashed that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about. I mean, there's so many different firearms that are out there, right? There's so many different firearms that are marketed towards a particular group of people or particular individuals or whatever it may be. How do we filter through that? How do we figure out what is a quality firearm? What does that look like versus maybe a more budget friendly firearm? Because I mean that's really what it is. I don't want to say that they're necessarily subpar. They in some respects they are, when comparing them to a quality firearm, something that you'd use for concealed carry. But what does that look like? Where do we start with that?
Right. I think everybody wants to, especially this day and age when everything is just so daggum expensive.
Right.
Everything is so expensive. People want to get the best bang for their buck, no pun intended. They want to buy the cheap firearm because the chances of me having to use this thing, slim to none. I'll just toss it in the glove box and I'll be good, right?
Yep.
That's a whole nother topic. But if you're going to purchase that firearm, right? If you're gonna spend if you're going to spend a nickel instead of a dime, evaluate it. You have to hold it against some type of realistic performance metric, right? You have to. And one of the things, if you don't know what quality looks like, honestly, I think one of the best places to go to find that is go to filsterholsters.com and see what holsters they make, or what guns they make holsters for. Go to henryholsters.com, same thing. Go to look for the quality holster company.
Yep.
They will tell you what a quality firearm is, what the top performing, the most reliable guns that are on the market, because they're making holsters for them.
Right.
They're not wasting their time on the weird, off.
Right.
Yeah.
Off-brand or whatever.
Off-brand guns.
So going back and talking a little bit about that. We used to again teach concealed carry classes pretty regularly, at least once a month. And there's used to joke all the time. Oh, it's a sky pistol or a high point pistol or whatever it may be. And then you get out to the range and guy brings out a sky or a high point pistol, right?
Yep.
So you used to crack and make jokes about that. I've had to back that down because there is time and place for that, right? So again, budget's a big piece of that. But should that, or let me back that up. Budget's a piece of that, or just knowledge, right?
Yeah.
They may just not know.
Right.
So regardless of that, should you use that firearm in defense for your life? It depends. I don't know if I would regularly carry that. I don't know if that would be something that I regularly use for concealed carry, just for me and my training, my knowledge, where I'm at today. But if it gets to the point where you need to understand, you need to train the firearm, you need to figure out how it works, how it functions, and if there are going to be any pitfalls with using a firearm. Is it going to cycle reliably when you need it to cycle? Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces of it.
Yeah, I want to tell our listeners that go out and get yourself a handgun that is within your budget, right, and spend the money on training.
Yeah.
I want to say that, but there is a problem with that too. Because if you spend your money on a cheaper firearm and you go and try to spend the rest of your money on training and learning how to use it, what happens when it fails and it breaks?
Well,
then you're spending your money again fixing it, taking it to a gunsmith, having them fix the problem, and then going back out training and waiting for it to break again.
Right.
And so that's the hard part there, man. Is I have a hard time. I have a hard time recommending a cheaper firearm, right? A budget gun or something like that, because I know they're going to break. We've seen it happen over and over and over again in our classes. Yep. Guns and gear break. It just happens.
And something else is, especially those cheaper firearms, at some point during your training journey, especially if you're training regularly, that gun is going to hold you back.
Right.
100%.
Yes.
Think of like the old LCRs or something like that, right? They have just absolute heavy garbage trigger. And at some point during your training, I'm not saying it right out the gate as a novice shooter, new shooter. I'm not saying that. But as you start to push that envelope of your skills and your capability, like really pursuing like regular training and really understanding what a good trigger press and everything looks like, at some point, you're going to start having issues with, that trigger control. What you've been used to doing for so long, with and potentially even creating some training scars to use this particular firearm. Now, when you get into something that's a little more quality, you may discover, wow, I've been using this particular firearm this particular way for so long, and it just doesn't work. It was a handicap, and it's holding me back.
Right.
I can't chase those faster split times, whatever it may be, because I can't physically do it. Like I can't work the firearm quick enough.
Right.
So again, there's another reason why if figure out that budget, all right, set that budget, but try and go to that upper end of that budget if at all possible. Try and stay away from the bottom end of those firearms.
Well, man, I mean, that's part of the reason why we started the show to begin with. Is it's hard to have that foresight of what problems that you might run into in the future should you buy a handgun and carry it around to defend yourself. It's hard to have that foresight if you haven't been formally introduced to what real training looks like.
Right.
And you don't have the knowledge of what guns are working, what guns don't, what's reliable and what's not. And there's just so much that goes into it. And then there's so much gun store banter that kind of leads the conversations most of the time right now.
Right.
And as we talked about earlier, it a lot of times it misdirects people. It directs them in the wrong direction, and based off of theories that just don't make any sense or concepts that don't make any sense.
Yeah, and again, talking about the gun stores, the guy who's standing behind the counter of a gun store isn't necessarily the point of authority you should be listening to.
Yeah.
To make to purchase a firearm.
Not always.
Not always.
Sometimes.
Yeah. It's again, stay away from never and always, or but at some point you really need to put the firearm in your hand, and you need to test, and you need to play, and you need to try and figure out things for yourself. You've been listening to the Rack Show. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we are back. Welcome to the Rack Show, the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show. We are talking about all things responsibly armed citizens should know, starting with firearms choices. We've talked a little bit about the deciding what firearms to choose. We've talked a little bit about revolver, semi-automatics. Talked a little bit about a quality firearm versus not. Let's talk a little bit about different types of ammunition, right? Because there is just an absolute slew of different types of ammunition. There's a lot of stuff that is, marketed towards self-defense. There's a lot of stuff that is maybe not so great. That is marketed towards self-defense, but then we also have just that knowledge of, again, I've heard people say this before. Again, talking about gun store banner. Oh, you just swap hollow point with ball ammo, like training ammo.
like
you
back
just
to back,
back to back. Yeah, just alternate them in a magazine,
That's
something
it.
like that. Yeah, you don't do that. But so let's talk a little bit about that. So, self-defense ammo. What are the different types of ammunition out there? What should I use for concealed carry?
All right, first, I think we should identify training ammo. Training ammo for full metal jackets, right? So you're talking about a ball round that is generally plated with, a copper or something along those lines. Sometimes they're lead-free, but they're one solid ball round.
Right.
Those are meant for punching holes in papers, flattening on steel. They're meant for punching holes in cardboard and perforating, cans in the backyard.
Right.
That's what they're meant for. They're not meant for self-defense because they generally pass through, whatever it is that they're shooting, including, harder, harder material, right? So what we want is some type of ammunition that might expand on impact, slow down, and still have a good amount of penetration, but not over penetrate.
Right.
Because what we find in a lot of these self-defense scenarios is that these are happening in public, around people. And, the last thing we want is to hit an innocent person. So if we have been training and we've been doing the right thing, we want to make sure that we're carrying the right ammunition too. Because otherwise, we might have a good shot, great placement, and over-penetrate and then hit, an innocent person.
Right.
So full metal jackets are meant for training. When you're going to the store to buy it, I mean that's the I don't know what they're going for right now. I guess $16 a box. Fiocchi or CCI Blazer brass or whatever. That's what you're going to find on the shelves primarily.
Right.
And then you get into the more specialized ammunition into hollow points. The gun industry is still an industry that will market you to death.
Right.
Right. I mean, they will say whatever it is that you want to hear so that you'll buy the product.
Right.
It's just the way the industry works. It's just the way industries work, right? And there are good hollow points to carry. There are bad hollow points that are not necessarily proven at all.
Yeah, there's not enough data.
Right.
Right. There's not enough information that's out there for them. And that's the thing, right? Do you want to trust and carry a boutique round, right? A boutique, hollow point, something like that, boutique self-defense round that may or may not do the job, and how does that look in a court of law?
Yeah.
Right. So these are all things to consider. So if you go back and you look at that, the FBI gel penetration test, right? That's really one of the standards, and we'll talk a little bit about ballistics later, but. It's 12 to 18 inches and an expansion of at least 1.5 times larger than the original diameter, right? So let's go out there and take a look at all the different brands that are out there on the market. Do they do that? Mm-hmm. And what data supports that? So a really quick way of going through and looking and analyzing that. Look at actual self-defense incidences. Look at what was actually used. Predominantly, what are we going to find? We're going to find information from police, right? Especially for the civilian. Right. So what does law enforcement carry? Why does law enforcement carry? It's because it's effective, because it's been proven. Right. And let me caveat that by saying it depends on the job,
Yes.
it depends on the law enforcement agency, right? So they're yeah, what works well for a state trooper who's shooting through a car,
Mm-hmm.
right? More often than not, isn't necessarily the same as a beat cop. But again, there's some variances there. But regardless, find that data, find that information. There's a ton of different places online that are credible sources that can provide that, and stick with a reputable self-defense company, right? A
Right.
reputable self-defense ammo manufacturer.
Right.
Spear Gold Dot. That's
Mm-hmm.
one of my go-tos. That's what I prefer. There's some Hornady brands that are out there that are absolutely fantastic, right? There's some quality ammunition that's out there, as far as self-defense ammunition.
Right.
But would, I would I would steer I would be cautious about using some of these other boutique, lesser known
Yeah.
brands, especially like the zombie killers and all this other kind of
Yeah,
stuff,
man.
right? It has I mean it has um, interesting marketing, right? It has
Right.
flashy marketing. Oh yeah, that's if it could stop a zombie, it could stop anything else. That kind of gamer-fied idea. But how is that going to look if you were to use that ammunition in self-defense, right? In a quarter wall, right? What
Yeah.
is a jury of your peers going to think of that?
When in reality, I mean, I know which ammunition you're talking about, and it's the same. Like if you go to like the box over, and it's Hornady critical defense. Like it's all it is. It's just that instead of a red tip, a red polymer tip, it's green.
Right.
That's it. It's the same thing, but they're going to market it in such a way to try and get you to pay $1 or $2 more for the green coloring, and that's it. But, so you got to be careful about these. The other ones are the like extremely lightweight ones.
Yeah.
You know, the idea is that this thing is just going to like crumble apart once it on impact, and it in theory, for somebody who doesn't understand ballistics or hasn't studied this very long, it makes a little sense. Like it makes sense to them. Oh well, maybe it won't just stop; it'll crumble and dissipate and that type of thing. No, that's not. It'll spread the trauma.
Yeah. Well, that's where we start getting into like the frangible and the copper. The frangible ammo is ammunition that's predominantly used for shooting at steel. So when it hits steel, you can be a little bit closer than we'll say 7 yards or something like that. You can get much closer to it, but it's a pressed powder, and so when it hits something hard, it just immediately just turns into a dust. Not that you should be breathing that in, but regardless, it's safer than shooting ball ammo close at a steel target or something like that. I have seen where some companies market frangible ammo for use for self-defense, doing exactly what you're talking about. The idea is once it penetrates, it's going to break up, and it's going to do more internal damage and cause cavitation, all this other kind of stuff. And you see the same type of marketing language with the 100% copper projectiles, where again, kind of the same idea. Usually, the 100% copper projectiles are really, man, they're evil looking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different shapes, a lot of machining that's happened to these copper projectiles. And again, the idea is, it's going to create just a lot of cavitation, a lot of a lot of internal damage. It's going to make this great big old hole. But again, where's the data? Right? There's a reason.
The data for the all copper projectiles, where I believe that has come down from, is the hunting world.
Right.
The hunting world, they're especially the long range rifle shooters, they're all about these all copper projectiles. They have much more. They're much more accurate, and terminal ballistics on them are generally excellent for hunting. I'm not so sure how I feel about them for self-defense purposes, mainly because, as you said, there's just not enough data. And if we're going off of different law enforcement,
Use
yeah,
adaptation.
I mean,
right.
there's only a few that are out there that really have sufficient data for you to say, all right, this is an educated reason for me to carry this ammunition. That's why the majority of people will carry Spear Gold Dot, or they'll carry Federal HSTs.
Right.
That's really the two most popular and best performing cartridges on the planet for law enforcement. So one of the best ways to to be able to back yourself up in the court of law is, hey, I'm carrying what my agency carries, you know,
Right.
or my local agency, you know, my local sheriff's department. I carry what they carry. So that's the reason why I chose that cartridge.
Right.
You know. Now, what about size? Does size matter? Like, should we talk? Do we have enough time to talk about like 9mm versus 45? I feel like that was done away with a long time ago. But I mean, I think we should bring it up.
I don't know, man. I'll talk about the internet. The internet is still on fire over 9mm versus 45. But
Jeez.
but is there a difference? I mean, physically, if you take a look at them, yeah, absolutely. Ballistically, what do you think? I mean, it was I heard. I'll tell this quick. I had a buddy of mine who was all hyped up over the 45. He was like, oh yeah, the pounds per square inch. I'm like, well, you're comparing it. It's a handgun, right? It's a hot piece of lead. It's not a frying pan flying out of the end of the firearm. Like it's not. That's not how this works. And
Speaking of ongoing, like just theories and stuff that have been, they've been debunked years ago. You look at the idea of knockdown power.
knockdown power.
That is not a thing. Knockdown power, like they determined that back in the 70s. I read an article inside of an old magazine written by a gentleman who was talking about the science behind terminal ballistics and just completely tearing apart this idea of knockdown power. When you get hit by a projectile, you don't literally get knocked over. People think that 45 ACPs are these like launching, frying pans out of the end of your barrel at 950 feet per second. It's just not the way it works. But, I feel like if we were to summarize, is smaller bullet or bigger bullet better? Try to think of it more like this. Bigger bullet does make a bigger hole, but it also makes a bigger bang, and it's hard to control. Little bullet makes smaller hole, but smaller issues with recoil management. Right? You can manage it much better.
And something else, the modern ballistics has come a long way.
Yeah.
There's a lot that has gone on with modern ballistics as far as how, certain cartridges work. Let's talk a little bit about that when we come back.
All right.
And welcome back to the Rack Show, the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show. I'm one of your hosts, Frank Horvath, and we are talking about different considerations when it comes to firearms, caliber. We talk about ammunition, gun selection, all the fun things. In studio with me is Tim, and let's talk a little bit more about or continue our conversation about different types of cartridges, different types of bullets for semi-auto versus revolver. We'll talk about different caliber choices. So let's kick it off. Tim, what are the differences between revolver ammunition and semi-auto ammunition?
Okay, so you have a couple of differences there. Mainly, there's a pretty big misconception on 9mm being a puny round as compared to like a 38 special, and the misconception comes from the size of the cartridge.
Right.
Well, what's really not considered by a lot of folks is that a lot of those gases are forced out of the gun prior to the
projectile
the time that the projectile exits the barrel.
Right.
So it goes out the forcing cone.
Correct.
And so that's part of the reason why the cartridge is so big is so it can account for that loss of energy, right? So it's not necessarily true that a 38 special is more powerful or more better than a 9mm. As a matter of fact, most of the time it will not outperform a 9mm cartridge.
Right.
Most of the time. Now, when you start looking at the Magnum cartridges and stuff like that, like 357 Magnum, that's when you start seeing a little bit more energy, right? And I try not to say the word power because then people start assuming I'm talking about knockdown power. I'm talking about energy, the transfer of energy from one point to another. So when we're talking about 357 and let's talk about 357 Magnum versus 38 Special. What's the major difference between the two?
Yeah, it's the amount of potential energy that's inside the cartridge, right? So generally speaking, there's a little bit of a length difference between the two cartridges, right? So it's very minute, right? Very, very small. But there's much more energy that's inside that 357, even though they're using the same projectile. Same weight projectiles, generally speaking, are very similar, very close, in the same family. 357, right? So somewhere in that neighborhood. But when we're talking about how fast, how quickly those projectiles are moving through the air, when we start looking about our different parts of ballistics, right? So we have our interior ballistics, we have our exterior ballistics, and we have our terminal ballistics. A 357 typically will have much more going on for it at terminal ballistics than a 38 will. Right. And a lot of that has to do with how that interior and exterior ballistics are affected, right? So you have, again, more power, more ammunition, et cetera. But can you safely use a 357 and accurately, precisely hit a target where you will need to, regarding its recoil and everything like that, versus a 38?
Right.
That's where it starts to get into it's an individual choice. And with modern ballistics, Tim, there's not too much of a difference. There is a difference, right? But there's not too much of a difference with modern ballistics. These companies have been able to go through and do rigorous testing on, using the FBI as a standard, the FBI testing protocol as a standard, to figure out, okay, what self-defense ammo should look like, what it should do, and how it's going to perform. And, is there a reason I need to rock a 357, a 44 mag? I'm not going after bear here, so.
So I'd say let's just look at the muzzle velocity in general for your typical self-defense ammunition. We'll talk about rimfire here in a little bit but that's generally one that you don't. It's not very common for realistic concealed carry purposes. Not very common. I didn't say it doesn't have a place, right? But if you look at the muzzle velocity of a 357 Magnum, it's somewhere around 1,500 feet per second. Yeah. All right, that's a lot of power. It's a lot of energy, right? If you look at the muzzle velocity of a 38 Special, 158 grain projectile, somewhere around 800. And then if you look at the typical, 9mm, let's say 115 grain, it's around 1155. And we're all talking about the same size projectile. Essentially, it is the same size projectile. So what exactly is it we're trying to achieve with more power? Mm-hmm. What is it we're trying to achieve if it's the same hole? And we look at what, for the purposes of concealed carry, that is, when you look at how these pistol projectiles perform on adversaries, right? It just pokes holes in things. Right. That's it. It pokes holes in things. Yeah, well, we like it to expand on impact and cause some type of, temporal cavity and that sort of. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we would love for that to happen, but it doesn't always work that way because, bones and cartilage and all kinds of other stuff kind of get in the way. Right. Yeah, stuff, clothing, right. It gets in the way. So when we talk about these different muzzle velocities, it seems so appealing to say, I want this big Magnum, cartridge. That's why you got guys wanting to carry 10 millimeters around and, right. The 44 Magnums and stuff. Guys.
Pass-through is a real thing.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. It's really not realistic. You want a cartridge that still has great performance, right, in terms of, ballistics. As far as ballistics are concerned, you want a cartridge that can perform, but not be overbearing. Right. You want to be able to control this thing.
See, and I really think that's the biggest piece of that, right? Is control. You have control of yourself, and you have control of the situation. You may be using a force multiplier to do so, but if you can't control that force multiplier, yes, then you are putting yourself and everyone else around you and the people down the street and around the corner, yep, in danger. Yep. And I really think that's a piece that a lot of people miss. They focus too much on, I want the biggest, the loudest, the nastiest fire-breathing dragon ever, right? But they don't want to consider, they don't actually want to go and put into practice and actually train and actually shoot, their concealed carry piece. It's expensive shooting, boutique rounds or bigger cartridges all the time. Yeah. If I want to compare, like we'll bring the 45 versus 9mm conversation back up. I can train a lot more with 9mm than I can with 45. Yeah. Because of cost. Yeah. Just cost alone, right? It has nothing to do with the actual ballistics of the cartridge. Right. The 9mm is cheaper. Same thing, 357 versus 38 Special. Right. Well, 38 Special is going to be way cheaper to train with. 38 Special versus 9mm. 9mm is going to be way cheaper to train with. But there is a point of diminishing returns. 22 17 HMR. 22 is dirt cheap. Right. I mean, you can find 22. I mean, you can buy a ton of 22, right, for rather cheaply. But is that a good cartridge? That rimfire cartridge, 17 HMR 22, is that a good cartridge to consider carrying?
I'm going to steal a line from you. It depends. it depends. I try to steer away from that that mindset of carrying rimfire at all costs, especially in semi-automatics, because if you've shot 22 long enough, that they fail. You're going to run into misfires. So that's a gun that or a cartridge you really need to have to prepare for, be it 22, 17 HMR, doesn't matter. They're all rimfire. Rimfire has problems, and you're going to experience stoppages. I would rather have a stoppage in a revolver than I would in a semi-automatic.
Absolutely.
So, 22s carried for self-defense in the form of a revolver are actually really, it's a really good choice. It can be a really good choice. It's not my first choice, but I do have one, and I have actually carried it around. But I can hide that gun really, really well. Right. Really well, and that's probably one of the reasons why I carry it. But anyway, moving on. Hey, man, let's talk about the competency of the month, because we've actually been talking about it essentially. But I want to make it a point to identify what it is that's on our minds on as far as the competency of the month this month. So for those of you that haven't been listening. The competency of the month was originally developed for an in-house overview of different topics, and our cadre study these topics every month, just in order to get more information and be able to translate that information to our student bases. So that's the way it originally started, and since we started the show, we thought we'd share it with you. So the Comp C of the month this month for September is functions of a cartridge or shell and the phases of ballistics. So we've been touching on it over and over and over again. I first want to point out the functions of a cartridge. The actual issues with center fire versus rim fire. I'm just going to point that out since we don't have a whole lot of time. Center fire cartridge has a primer in the center of the case, right? So the center, and you can actually remove that primer and replace it. Those are reloadable, right? A rim fire cartridge is more like a 22 or a 22 long rifle, 17 HMR, 22 Magnum, that type of thing, where the primer is contained around the rim of the case. So what makes that problematic is the center fire cartridge is struck by a hammer or a firing pin or a striker or something along those lines, and the priming compound is in one specific location, one spot. On the rim fire, it may be in that spot where it can the striker connects with the rim.
Manufactured correctly.
Yeah, it might, and then it might not. And most of the time, there's a lot of might nots.
Right.
So we talk about we'll talk about a little bit more about it in depth on the next show. But I really wanted to point that out, especially when you're talking about concealed carry. You want to make sure that you have reliable ammunition, something that that you can rely on. And there's good rimfire ammunition out there, don't get me wrong, but it's not enough for me to trust it 100% of the time.
Oh yeah, 100%. If you take a look online, there's a lot of really good content as far as rimfire and people that use particular type of rimfire ammunition, and you can look at cases. There are actual cases where rimfire was used in self-defense. As my go-to, as my immediate, like my knee-jerk, hey, this is what I'm going to carry, and I'm not. Yeah. Frank's not. But it's your decision, and it's your responsibility. You've been listening to the Responsibly Armed Citizen Show. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you next week.